This is our lesson on annotated bibliographies. So, you'll notice under the course module that I've included a couple of subheadings underneath our annotated bibliography introduction video. The first section is annotated bibliography samples from English 1110, and here you'll find samples that other English 1110 students in past years have done. Some of these were from several years ago, some of them were from much sooner. I've also included a section from Purdue OWL on annotated bibliography samples. It explains some of the thought that goes into annotated bibliographies a little bit better and provides some samples that are not strictly limited to the requirements for our course. So, for the purposes of our course, an annotated bibliography should, above all else, be designed to quickly and accurately summarize sources. This will help you as you work on your final papers, not only by giving you an opportunity to get your thoughts down on the page, which is sometimes the most difficult part, but also as a quick reference for useful sources as you progress toward the final paper. So with all that being said, what is an annotated bibliography and how does it differ from a regular bibliography? It's kind of in the name. So a regular bibliography is a record of all of the sources that you would typically have used or have potentially used in a paper. So everything you've read in preparation for a paper that you either cited within the paper itself or maybe didn't cite directly but were influenced by. So it's a record of all of the text that went into your way of thinking and helped to shape the overall structure of your paper. An annotated bibliography is a list of sources with annotations describing what the source is about, how it's useful, how you plan to use it within your paper itself. It's basically more or less for you. This is a way of, it's not necessarily pre-writing, but it's a way of getting your sources together before the pre-writing stage. You locate a bunch of sources, say, this is what this source is about, this is how I intend to use it. That way, you know, when you go back to the annotated bibliography 2 or 3 weeks down the road, all you have to look or do is look at the page and see, oh, okay, this was the source I plan on using, this is how I intend to use this source, and then just insert it into the paper and go from there. It speeds up the writing process. It allows you to get some ideas down on the paper the first time you come across them, so it lets you give first impressions, initial ideas, things that you might forget in intervening weeks. And it helps to organize your thoughts as you plan the final paper itself. So to that end, let's take a look at some of the annotated bibliography samples from other English 1110 students. The first one on the list is the annotated bibliography sailing document. So this one is more or less okay. It's a little bit short. Some of the annotations don't cover quite as much material as I would prefer, or as I would hope that they would cover. But generally it meets all of the basic requirements of a good annotated bibliography. This is what the source is about. This is how I intend to use the source. This one in particular is a little light on details about the sources themselves, so it doesn't do a great job of summarizing. All you really need is 1 or 2 sentences. This one does that in some places, doesn't do it in others. Let's take a look at the first source that it cites. Kathy Beale, Setting Sail, ABA Journal 74.90, 1988. So Setting Sail describes the sailing career of Denise C. Mitrano, an attorney. The article describes the way in which she was introduced to sailing and competitive racing. I found it interesting that this ordinary businesswoman found sailing to be an exciting way to fill her free time. Okay, so let's break this down just a little bit. The first sentence, Setting Sail describes the sailing career of Denise C. Mitrano, an attorney. Excellent. We know what the source is about. We know generally what kind of quotes we're going to find inside the source, what is going to be talking about, what's the thrust of the article. Second sentence, the article describes the way in which she was introduced to sailing and competitive racing. Okay, we're still sort of introducing the concept. I found it interesting that this ordinary businesswoman found sailing to be an exciting way to fill her free time. All right, now we know what the student finds interesting about the article. What we're lacking in this first annotation is any indication of how it could possibly be used in the overall paper. So we get the general sense. Maybe the paper is about sailing, maybe it's about racing, maybe it's about women sailing or doing sailboat racing. Maybe it's about competition of some other variety. Not entirely certain from this. Which is a little bit of a problem, right? We know what the student finds interesting, we know what the article is about, but we don't necessarily have any indication of how it's going to be used analytically to support arguments the student makes. Let's take a look at the second source. So this is Herb McCormack, The Boating Report, Sailors Are Eager to Return Racing to Normal. This one accomplishes the goals of an annotated bibliography just a little bit better. So this article from the New York Times begins by discussing the significant drop in registration for the yachting events such as the Key West Race Week after September 11th. However, I found the second portion, which focused on the return of interest in registration to major sailing regattas, pertained to my research topic more closely. I plan to research the types of people who are drawn to sailing regattas. The article focuses on the diversity of people drawn to the Key West Race Week. According to the article, the roster includes both those of international sailing talent and contestants who are not quote rock star racers. Okay, so here we have a better idea of what the source is about, more description, more detail. We have a better indication of why the student is interested. The student loses the thread of their writing a little bit toward the end of the annotation, but for the most part, we have an indication of how the source can be used analytically, what kind of points it's going to be used to support, how the student is thinking about this in terms of the final paper. All very important details to include in the annotation. And again, it's only about a paragraph long, so when the student goes back to take a look at this as they get closer to writing the final paper, all they'll have to do is see the source, read their quick little paragraph summary, and be like, this is exactly what I was thinking of. Let me include this in this part of my paper. All right, so let's move on. This is the sample annotated bibliography on Breaking Bad. So this one is a little bit different. It falls a little bit short of the, expectation requirement, but it does a much better job of summarizing the sources and describing how they'll actually be used in the final paper. So let's take a look at the first citation on this one. That's Santalaria Isabel, Dexter, Villain, Hero, or Simply a Man. This source was written by Isabel Santalaria for the Journal of the Spanish Association of Anglo-American Studies. The writer's main point in was that in today's day and age, there is now a progressive movement between types of masculinity, new man, and patriarchal man. These differ in the way that the new man masculinity accepts the changing role of man in a home and becoming more anti-sexist and more pacified. Patriarchal man, on the other hand, deals with aggression, survival, and individualism. This directly relates to my topic because it will allow me to use the points made within this journal to help identify what kind of masculinity Walt, Hank, and Walt Jr. Is based on the scene I selected. Additionally, I will be able to look at how Walt and Hank both act as fatherly figures and relate their actions to the ideas stated within this source. Okay, so comparing that to the sailing annotations we just read, we have a much better idea of what it is the student's interested in and how they plan to adapt this secondary source material to a description or to an analysis of their primary source. So the primary source, it's a scene from Breaking Bad, we kind of get that. The secondary material has to deal with the types of masculinity presented in Dexter, which was another show that was on around the same time as Breaking Bad. And what it does is it takes a look at how these different forms of masculinity are being performed on the stage, or in this case in the television show, and then enters into a discussion of exactly what is it that is rhetorically being accomplished by presenting masculinity in this way or in this way or in this way. And what the student does is they say, well, I'm going to take the analysis that's been done on this one particular source here and use the similarities to use this as a comparative point for the source that I'm looking at. So I'm going to take this work that's been done on Dexter, and I'm going to use the similar points to enter into a conversation with my particular analysis of a scene in Breaking Bad. The two things, well, not exactly the same. They are in the same sort of domain, or in a similar sort of domain. So creating a conversation is not all that difficult, and it works particularly well with this kind of source, so with a television show. Let's take a look at their second annotation. So this is by Timothy Allen Pelkey. This source was written by several different authors. This was published by The Fathering, a journal of theory, research, and practice about men as fathers journal. The main point presented within this piece is based on the research done by several different shows. That fathers within different demographics all act in similar yet different ways. All right, so let's pause here. So what they did expertly in the first annotation, they sort of fall away from in this annotation, which is why I said that this particular annotated bibliography sample does some things great and other things not so great. So first of all, let's look. This source was written by several different authors. Okay, you don't really need to tell me that. That's kind of useless information. This source was published by The Fathering, a journal of theory, research, and practice about men as fathers journal. Okay, so what we have here is a description of the journal that it was published in, and it's not one that I've ever come across before, so the extra detail is somewhat useful. What's not necessarily provided is a description of what material the journal typically publishes, how it's seen in the academic community. This one looks to be not necessarily an academic source. Maybe it's a private source that sort of emulates an academic form. I would have some questions about this material that I would like answered in the annotation. All it takes is a sentence, this is how it's regarded, or this is how I found it, or etc., etc., etc. The next sentence. The main point presented within this piece is based on the research done on several different shows that fathers within different demographics of shows all act in similar yet different ways. Okay, so this sentence is a little long and a little clunky. You could probably just sum it up and say the main point within the article is that father figures in sitcoms or father figures in television shows share a certain set of similar characteristics, and yet their behaviors manifest in different ways. The student goes on to provide examples of this, which is actually accomplished pretty well, and then ends with a statement, this relates to my topic because I can use this research to help categorize where Walt lies based on the information provided within the source. So a good summary of how exactly it could be used. Where this particular annotation falls off a little bit, where it could use a little bit of extra work, is really in the introduction of the source. So we know the source was written by multiple authors, but that doesn't really apply to what we're working on. It doesn't really add anything to the annotation or to our final analysis. And the fact that it was published in the fathering, we can tell from the citation itself, we don't necessarily need that material in the annotation. If you're going to include it, make sure there's a point to it. So this was included in the fathering. Here's what the fathering journal is about. And give something substantive so that we know how we're supposed to read this material. Is this an opinion piece? Is this academic? Is this peer-reviewed? Is this something that you can get from a vanity publisher? Vanity publisher is a publisher you pay to publish what you write. And it'll give you an idea of how rigorous the evaluation of the source material is. So, if you're going to include the source, if you're going to say it was published in this journal, when I can just look at the citation and see that, make sure there's a point to it, right? So it was published in this journal, and this is why, I should care about that. All right, so let's move on to the last one. Our last sample annotated bibliography is on country music, and this one is the weakest of the group. So the first citation here, Pamela Fox, Recycled Trash, Gender and Authenticity in Country Music Autobiographies. This source focuses more on the country music artist and how their life experiences influence the music they write. Many artists will write about their own personal struggles with relationships, raising children, being a working parent, etc. The women artists sing about holding their babies for the first time, about being a parent, where the men will sing about the hell their children raised. Women will sing about touching moments when they hold their baby for the first time, and then their first steps, when men seem to avoid singing about moments like that. Okay, so first off, what we're lacking here is any indication of how the student is going to use this material in their paper. Instead, it's sort of replaced with a general description of the kinds of songs that country artists perform and whether they're more likely to be performed by a man or a woman. Okay, that's interesting. It's well in line with, I guess, a general summary of the source, but we don't really need all of that material in the annotation. That material is in the article itself. In the annotation, you should be selecting elements that you plan to use in the paper and highlighting those. So instead of saying that many artists will write about their own personal struggles and relationships with raising children, being a working parent, etc., maybe include a couple of examples. So many artists will write about their own struggles with alcoholism, or with being a single parent, or with being a working parent and not getting to spend time with their kids, or that kind of thing. So be a little bit more specific with the examples, but not as specific as the student gets later on, saying the women artists sing about, etc., while the men artists sing about, etc. This is all extraneous information. You can kind of get that from reading the article itself, and the annotation is meant to speed up that process, so you don't actually have to go back and read the source material in order to jog your memory about what it was about. Let's take a look at the second annotation. George H. Lewis, All That Glitters, Bowling Green State University Popular Press. All right, so the type of source this is coming from, Bowling Green State University Popular Press. It's an academic press, but, it's an academic publisher, but a popular press for the publisher. So it's maybe a little bit less rigorous than a standard academic journal. So this reading has broken down many different country songs and looked into the lyrics to analyze the roles of the people the song is about. In many cases, the man is the head of the family and the wife is there to support him. Many songs talk about how the man is struggling and may stumble once in a while, but his wife is very clued into her husband's needs and she is there to support him, both emotionally and sexually. In country music, a man's status is derived from his ability to provide for his family, and a woman's status is derived from her ability to care for her man and allow him to provide for her. Okay, so that right there, excellent summary of the source material, right? It's saying that in this article, Lewis takes a look at several different country songs, breaks them down to their component parts, does an excellent analysis of them, looks at exactly how these parts work together and what they attempt to achieve rhetorically. Basically what we're trying to do. Where it falls off a little bit, where it could use a little bit of work, is that it doesn't give us any indication of how the student plans to use this material in their final paper. So this is a good start. This is actually, I would say it's an excellent start. We have an idea about what the source material is, what approaches were used, how analytical it is, how academic it is it a popular source, etc. We just don't have any real indication of how the student is going to use it in their own paper. So that's just a general overview of all of the sample annotated bibliography material. You guys can go through that in your own time, of course, and I encourage you to do that. Generally, all of these samples accomplish the requirements of the assignment. Some do it better than others. We pointed out places where they're strong, places where they could use a little bit of extra work. But overall speaking, any of these templates would be a good one would be good to use for your own annotated bibliographies. One thing to always keep in mind, one thing to remember, is that the purpose of an annotated bibliography should, above all else, be for you to be able to quickly apprehend and summarize the sources that you're taking a look at that you plan to use in your final paper. And it should be a useful research tool. It should be geared toward what you're writing about. It should be something that helps you craft your final paper and not something that gets in the way. So, sometimes it feels like maybe we're jumping through hoops, but this is a good tool to have in your toolkit. It's a good strategy to be able to use for writing academic papers going forward in your college career.